Hello, everyone. Today we have awesome guest, Felix, who working in startup space, and he's founder himself. Hi, Felix.
Nice to be on call.
Thank you. Pleasure all mine. So, Felix, tell me a little bit about yourself and your experience with startups.
Yeah, so I've been in the startup space for quite a few years. I've worked with about 7 startups now, and I've worked with organizations across Australia, Singapore, Indonesia, and I'm currently working on my second startup at the moment within the workplace mental health aspect, looking at all the factors which lead to poor mental health, and then how can we build systemized and digital solutions to close that loop, which happens to also be new workout safety laws, which have been in place for about a year and a half now.
Nice. I didn't know about that. That's interesting. And tell me a little bit more about your Indonesian journey in Singapore. I obviously saw some posts on Facebook, but I think like it would be awesome to hear from you, how you've been involved in the community.
Yeah, so I used to work for about within the tech and business strategy side for a bunch of different startups in Australia. And along my journey, at some point, I managed to be able to do for a couple months of work with a startup in Singapore, which was really interesting for me because obviously different market, different. Singapore's very large within the fintech aspect of things, and I went there to work with an environmental data science company startup. And very interesting, the founder there, he was putting everything into the startup his whole time. Every resource he had, obviously there, he was also, it was linked to his visa. So lots of pressure on him. And I was helping him work through that, prepare pitch decks, prepare a bit the business strategy. And then I in Indonesia. So after that, went to Indonesia, spent 6 months helping set up social enterprise. So mothers in street situations being able to then upcycle fashion or plastic waste to make different pouches, which they could then sell in markets, as well as set up digital record systems, medical systems for people again in street situations, particularly to be able to identify when kids are being going through stunting due to malnourishment. So at the moment, they just have heaps of paper records, which doesn't let them see the trends they need to be able to go, okay, there's something wrong here. So I did a lot of work there again. Very interesting, very resource constraint, no financial backing whatsoever to, even something as simple as host a website. And you're working with people who have very low digital literacy, so don't necessarily know how to use computers. So yeah, again, very, very different environments.
It is very different, and my next question would be actually what the main difference you see between the markets, because like you've been in Australian market and Asian, Singapore, what biggest difference between these countries in terms of startup culture?
I wasn't able to fully experience the startup culture in Indonesia because I was definitely more involved, like on the ground within communities, which would have been a lot more distant from, say, the startup culture, where most of it would be in, say, Jakarta. But I've explored a lot of different ecosystems across Southeast Asia specifically for that startup culture. And what I've noticed is different understandings or maturity around different startup concepts, such as what a minimal viable product is, as the concept being the quickest way for you to get the most amount of effort or most amount of learning for your viability, feasibility, and desirability, as compared to investing your $200,000 of your own personal money into something which, because it's the first thing you launch, probably won't work. So I did notice that in a couple of the more emerging countries, where, say, Singapore, because there's such an easy access to finance due to almost lack of or tax incentives from investment point of views, makes it a lot easier for companies to get those finances, use Singapore as a tiny test bed, and then scale it overseas quite quickly, as compared to Australia, where you see a lot of founders go, okay, I'm going to start in, say, Sydney and maybe expand to the other states, or start in Melbourne and expand Australia wide. They have to expand internationally from very early on, which I think is much more supportive of that high growth kind of company.
And currently, you're working on a startup yourself in the health space. So please tell me more a little bit about the startup itself, and also about your co-founder and how did you guys meet?
Sure. So my startup at the moment, I'll give you a bit overview of the journey. We met over a coffee catch up, had supported each other through. I helped him through a bit of a mental health situation, and we want to bring the what we'd gone through to a lot of people out there, both being interested within the AI tech space and both coming from an impact background. We wanted to see the opportunities which were there. So we blocked out the rest of our days. We went in a room, went hackathon style. By the end, we launched a small MVP or a little project which we went out there to try and test different opportunities if there was even demand. And what we launched was an AI chatbot CVT. This was as during the rise of GPT, so this would have been 2023 at the very start. So very large on the intersection between AI and mental health, or LLMs and mental health. So we got about 300 people who used it within the first 2 weeks. So we knew there was something, but we didn't know the business case. So we spent 12 months trying different business cases and trying to sell to businesses. They told us it's too much of a nice to have. We tried working with therapists, looking at some of the problems there, but it didn't quite align because they're busy and giving more referrals wasn't always the right solution. We tried different B2C ways where we'd ask people to maybe pay or subscribe or donate. And we had like about 2 donations come through. And we were like, okay, it's a bit of a friction point, not really what we're trying to do. So we tried all these different routes, kept speaking to people, kept iterating until we had about 5 different ways we could go in a business direction. One of them was this emerging interest in a space, this legal space for companies to solve. Essentially, all businesses in Australia have this requirement to look at all the different factors within the company which lead to poor mental health. So such as poor intercommunication or lack of support or high job demands. So there's about 14 different of these factors which businesses have to identify, assess, put in different recommendations or controls for, and then be able to evaluate the effectiveness of that. It's the same as one would do for physical safety, but now they have to do it with mental health. So we went in from that angle after that, which was a much stronger business case. And we spent a whole year trying to deal in this emerging market where businesses knew they had to do something, but they didn't know what they had to do. So very interesting startup space where the market is completely fresh and emerging. So as from a startup trying to get clients, it becomes tricky, you know.
That's so cool. And you also mentioned that you just like met your co-founder and you went like straight to building the product. So did you previously met, or it was just laugh at the first sign, let's say, and connecting on the problem so much that you knew that's a perfect match?
Yeah, no, thank you for the question. So we'd known each other for about 2 years by then, about a year and a bit.
Okay.
We would do hackathons or problem solving competitions together. Essentially, you have 48 hours to solve a problem in a big problem space, and you go up there pitching not just an idea, but usually you garner and figure out the root causes of problems, interviewing people to do that. You build a product, and then you try and get some sales or partnerships locked in. So we've done quite a few of these very intense, start completely fresh from problem, finish with like, a couple sales or partnerships or expressions of interest signed, and then pitched. So we knew how we would work in those high stress environments, which I feel is very
Nice.
different than when you meet someone and you go, yeah, we kind of align idea wise. But then when you get in those high stress environments, things start falling apart. So we've known each other through that, and we helped each other on a couple of different projects since throughout that too. Yeah.
Great, because so many people are trying to meet the co-founders. I know that they're lacking particular skills, but it is really hard for many people, even including myself, to actually found this co-founder who, you can continue a journey. And obviously there's multiple levels. It's not only skills, but it should be friendship levels. You should connect on the vision and everything. So what would be like your advice, how people can find the co-founders?
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because I've been on both ends where my previous startup actually split up because of co-founders going different ways.
Tell me more. Tell me more. Like, how did you find your previous co-founder, and why do you think it didn't work?
Yeah, so we met almost through referrals to each other. So I had one person, so it started off as part of a program, startup program. There was a program working through problem space, and I joined up with another person. They have a background in more philosophy, critical thinking, politics, economics, that a really great critical thinker, which is really valuable in the startup space and really helped me improve my ability to work through different assumptions, highlight that, work through it. And then we needed someone in a legal space. So we're looking in the parental separation space. So we needed someone with a legal background. And then so I asked someone which I knew who had that ideation problem solving capability, yet also was quite good in the legal space. And they had another friend, which they recommended. So we had a team of four, which is quite big as co-founding teams go.
It is.
And it was quite interesting, and we kept working through it, and it was quite a good dynamic because some people got busy, so we all had other commitments as well. Some people got busy, other people would be able to pick up the slack. I think what ended up happening was the momentum started getting slower and slower, and then the opportunities of what would come out of working within the startup, because it got so stretched out. So this was after 2 years and a bit. It's like, okay, well, there's other commitments people were working on and other opportunities working on. It's like, okay, look, I can see more things coming back to me from that. So maybe it's best if we part. So that was an interesting and a bit of a hard hard time, but I think we dealt with it really well in the sense that no one feels bad to anyone about it, and we all still like friends can connect and support each other. Yeah, and that enabled me to step back as well and work on what I'm doing now.
Nice. And on the startup that you're working on right now, are you working full time or you still have another job?
Yeah. So I'm working full time, as I'm sure you'll be hearing more of as well throughout the podcast. The startup is not bringing me any financial. So obviously, particularly in a market where it's still emerging, businesses are still realizing this is something they need. And when they do, it's quite that emergent response kind of rate. So it's quick for us to have to act. So what we've had to do, or what I've had to do, is get a secondary, or what is actually my primary source of income. So I run workshops, business, startup, storytelling, pitching workshops, design thinking workshops for the university that I went to. So as part of the entrepreneurship arm, I've joined as a casual worker, and every couple of weeks they just put in my calendar, can you go to this class, run a workshop for an hour and a half? And I just rock up, I run the workshops, and that's how I make enough to buy food, pay for fuel, your living
That's
expenses.
important. We all eat, unfortunately. Do you have any income from your startup, or your only source of income it's actually these workshops?
Yeah, so I don't have any income from the startup. My main source is from these workshops. The startup, we have a small investment on a safe note, but that we use just to pay for the startup operating expenses. So it's quite fortunate in that sense that I don't have to put as much of the money from the workshops to then also pay for the startup operations, because that would be also quite a bit. But no, none. We haven't had enough come through for me to then be able to take that out as a founder.
Yes, that's amazing. And what's the long-term vision in terms of the finance and the startup? Do you have it anywhere on the horizon that founders going to take the salary from it?
Yeah, so the vision with the startup and what my co-founder and I have agreed on, and always gets a bit tricky, is we are trying to build a business startup for impact. So we aren't necessarily aiming for that $1 billion unicorn, but much more business, which is scaling. So a startup at scale, which is delivering impact at scale. So the concept there, the framework is more around, if you want an animal, would be more of a zebra, which is balancing the profit and purpose, which has meant that for us, particularly because we are in a slightly unknown market where it's hard to show the value of the market or the potential of the market, it doesn't make sense for us to raise. So we've had to bootstrap a lot of it, which is why going forwards, the payments and plans or us getting money back from it is taking a while compared to people who raise and hire and so forth. So the plan going forwards is we still need to prove or test that hypothesis of whether this bootstrapping model works for the space we're in. And if it takes up, then we might raise. But before that, short term, hopefully by the end of this year, we'll be able to have enough to be able to take a bit out for me to be able to be more independent on the startup. If the startup does take off and we have that bit more of product market fit, then again, raising a bit to scale, that would make sense. Or if we find we have to go in another direction, which is more investable, then we'd have to look at that too. Yeah.
Nice. And did you or your partner put any of your money into startups, or it's only investor money there?
Yeah, so when I say investor, we have only 10K on a safe note, which we've used for about 2 years now, about 1.5 years. So we've been running really lean. We use loads of open source tools to cut costs. We try not charge or use big costs. So our own money, we used a bit at the start, so before we got that 10K. So simple things like business setup, or subscriptions beforehand. So for that whole first year of operating. And since then, we've been trying to rely on that 10K and pay back if there's someone doing their own investments and looking for a refund.
Nice. And do you have any paying customers so far?
So the quick answer is no, but we've come very, very close many times the whole of last year. which was actually quite surprising for me. Gone in the space and we mapped out our strategy and we were like, look, based off the traction so when we pivoted to the space, we were able to get our first pilot within the first 2 weeks and got really strong positive feedback. So we're like, okay, if it took us 2 weeks to get to that, we projected to be able to get a certain number of paying customers by the end of the year, a certain amount of revenue. But by the end of the year, we'd put through quite a few proposals, got very close with many businesses, and kept being pushed back with simple things like our point of contact being fired, complete restructuring the company, all these major events. And we're like, not easy when you're trying, you're spending 3-4 months working on a deal and then it's being postponed for another 2 months. So we haven't gotten to that thing. I'm hoping maybe the next week or so, but it's been that constant. Yes, it should be there. Yes, it's coming. But at the same time, that was something I struggled with last year, where I had these expectations that I should be here. We should be meeting these goals and targets. Why is it that we're not? Why is it that myself as a founder, I'm not achieving that? So, and then obviously there was that financial stress as well, and financial pressure as well. So yeah, that was an interesting process to go through.
And what do you think? What would you do better now, you knowing that you're so close to so many yeses, but it went back to square one, right? So what do you think was wrong, and what would you change?
I think one of the major things I'd learned is I was using all these concepts and expectations and targets from having worked in startups where the market is a lot more defined. So where the desirability or market is a lot more defined, where it's a lot easier to get that problem solution fit. As we're working in a space where the viability exists because of a regulatory demand, yet the problem from a business point of view is slightly unknown and they don't know what they need. So there's a big part on the whole education on knowing the stakeholders, which took us a while to figure out, I'd say, as they discover what they need, as what they need evolves from month to month. So I think it took me a while to come to terms with that dynamic nature in a completely fresh market compared to my previous experiences, which were in a lot more developed or existing markets. So that would be probably the first thing I would take back if I was to go. I think secondly, having that second source of income has definitely made it a lot easier because I'm still able to work within this problem space that I care about, and I just have to acknowledge that it will take longer than I thought.
With the first startup you mentioned with four co-founders, how did you operate it back there? Did you still have some job on the side, or was it all in on the startup?
Yeah, it wasn't all in on the startup. The startup back then was much more a side project, if that makes sense.
Yep.
So working on in evenings or a bit of time in weekends, which was why it was so stretched out and why the momentum felt like it, was a lot slower than it can be in a startup. But when I'd worked previously for startups, obviously I was being paid by startups.
Nice. And how does it feel now, like progress and like any other aspect wise, working full time on a startup, like from the morning to the evening, or we all know it's flexible hours, right? When you feel right, versus when you have to work after your main job or on the weekends.
So I find now I'm still experimenting with the best way for me to work time-wise. So that can mean, for example, if I need to do a lot of deep work, so write up an agreement, a legal agreement or contract, I have to work on the product. I tend to try and wake up early, so around 4:30, and then because then I know I won't get any distractions.
That's
Like
really
emails,
early.
messages. So then I can start working on it early till about like 6, 7, like we'll have breakfast. Then I can keep working on whatever I'm working on till about 9. And then because of, some days I will have meetings, some days I'll have to go run a workshop. It's very dynamic and fluid in that I don't really know what my day will come to me with. So I have to be quite reactive in your typical 9 to 5 to what comes up. And then usually sometimes I'll go, look, I'm done after 5, I'm quite tired. Or sometimes if there is a tiny bit more, I'd do a bit more. But I usually would know no longer than 9 o'clock because then I'm brain dead. So that, yeah. And that does change. So that's particularly this year where it's been a lot busier. Last year there were days where it was just so quiet that I had tasks to do, but it was harder to motivate myself to do it because there wasn't that drive or momentum or opportunities or the excitement. It's like, look, I'm feeling quite low energy today. I do need to take a bit of time to actually cope with this, and then I will do it later today. So that was very different to what it's like now. Compared to previously, when working on side projects, evening, weekends, I was able to work, later because I had to get it done because I had other work to do in those other hours. So yeah, I feel like I was somehow managed to get a lot more work and output back then than what I'm
Really?
doing now.
Wow, that's interesting.
So yeah, I'd say I managed to get quite a lot of output. Last year was a bit more of a trough, and then now I'm getting back.
Interesting. So you're saying because you had such a small window to work, so you had to put like so much energy, and it doesn't matter whether you feel like working or not, that's your only time to work. So you felt like you're actually performing much better than now when you have like a whole 24 hours to work and you're probably delaying and less motivated.
No, not quite. I meant more. So now I'd say it's like when I have the time, I use as much every hour I can. Whereas last year there was a bit more because it was quiet. There wasn't quite going on, and I often hit quite low energy points. So I had a bit of motivation to try and push through and work. So I'd have the tasks to do every day and then work through them. Before that, when I was working on like the other startup, it wasn't necessarily I was able to achieve more, but because I only had about 2 hours level of focus and output or more efficiency, I'd say it was quite good. About like what I'm doing now, but compared to last year, where it is a lot more quiet and harder to push through, I'd say efficiency wise.
And you mentioned that you also run workshops. Does it help you anyhow with your startup? Does it open any opportunities for the startup?
So I do run the workshops. I run workshops for university students. So oftentimes they are from a range of disciplines: business, social entrepreneurship, technology, arts. So a whole range of disciplines. I'd say I haven't necessarily gained any opportunities from that. Sometimes I'm able to meet professors who are working on interesting spaces, but no, it hasn't necessarily unlocked new opportunities. Being with the entrepreneurship body at the university That, though, has given me one or two interesting opportunities in terms of partnerships with the university. So it's opened up those doors, but the workshops themselves, no.
Okay. And the last question, what would be your advice to the people who are just thinking to start their startup and they're deciding whether should they go all in with a startup or start it with, as a side project and just in general, like having all the doubts whether it's a viable idea?
Yeah, it would depend on the person. So this year I'm running workshops. Last year I was being paid to mentor early stage companies which were linked with the university. So I mentored about 60 different startups through that. And so you got to meet loads of different founders, co-founders at different stages and different stages in life. For some of them, what I notice is if they'd had previous startup experience and they were able to self-identify startup or business experience, self-identify, look, this is picking up quite a lot. I'm getting a lot of demand and pull to the point where they were like, okay, yes, I can justify now why I might want to work on it to bigger capacity, whereas others I'd seen work on it as a side project till it picked up a bit. And in other spaces where it can be a lot more competitive, or and I'd met a lot of people who, they'd been made redundant, in which case it's okay. They're going into startups to try and make their own opportunities, make their own career progressions. And in that case, it's okay. Is there that financial backing behind you to be able to make it last? Or are you simply going to raise funds to pay your own salary? So that I've met a whole range of different people. So I can't really, it's hard to make a general statement. I think there's also the element of what stage in people's career they are at, family, or all these different factors which influence the can I go all in? Can I not go all in? Should I go all in? So I think I'm lucky in that aspect for what position I'm in. I know many people aren't able to be that lucky or able to take that amount of risk because, and the reason I say that is going back to I think, the intent that you're trying to go with this podcast, which is particularly if you're looking at a bootstrapped route, it often will take a bit longer than one expects. Like most startups I've seen, it's taken about 3 years for that magic moment to happen. But that doesn't mean they aren't being paid for those 3 years. It's just not necessarily at the capacity one would want. Yeah. So that would be if looking at startup, if you're bootstrapping, and the market demand isn't obvious from the get-go, it will probably take a bit longer than one expects. Otherwise, I'd be looking at one's different factors in one's life, career, family, personal aspirations, as well as the space the startup is in and the organic demands and the personal background that the founder has. Not the best answer, but
Great.
if it's something.
Yeah, no, yeah, but that's the truth, right? So everyone is different and all the circumstances are different for everyone. Thank you so much, Felix, for having this chat. It was really nice to have you.
No, thank you, and best of luck bringing the stories out.